Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 2024 Latinx Kidlit Book Fest. Please read the anti-harassment statement in the chat box. And this is Writing Scares and Suspense in Your Story with myself, Adrianna Cuevas, and my good friend, Samantha Mabry. We're going to introduce ourselves and our work and then dive in. But Samantha's going to start off and tell you a little bit about herself and her books.
Okay. Hello. My name is Samantha Mabry. I think Adrianna and I are both from Texas. Like, we are in different parts of Texas right now. So hello, everyone. So you can see my books here. I'm the author of 4 young adult novels, but the one that I'll be talking about today is Clever Creatures of the Night, which was released in the spring from Algonquin Young Readers, and it's classified as a literary horror.
I love that cover, by the way. I think that's gorgeous.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. And hi, everyone. I'm Adrianna Cuevas. I'm the author of a few books for middle grade readers. I write mostly contemporary fantasy. I have one historical fiction that's down there, cube in my pocket, but the book I'm going to be focusing on today comes out this coming Tuesday. It is The No-Brainer's Guide to Decomposition, and it is my first very, very solid horror novel for middle grade readers that I'm excited about for you all to read. But Samantha and I wanted to start off by kind of sharing with you all an experience that we both had as young writers that really got us into maybe writing the kinds of books that we do, because we both do write books that do have a bit of suspense and tension and things like that. So for me as a young writer, I feel like what put me on the path to writing the stories that I do is actually, I have the exact book that I read when I was probably too young to be reading this book. And that is this anthology right here. It's an anthology of poems and short stories by Edgar Allan Poe. And if you don't know who Edgar Allan Poe is, he wrote rather amazing horror. But this one is special to me because it's illustrated. And I don't know why my parents were so cool with me reading this when I was a young child, because the illustrations look like this. And I was absolutely obsessed with this book. I would stare at the illustrations for hours. But I think what I absolutely loved most about Edgar Allan Poe's work was that while he could write these really, really amazing horror stories, he wrote some really, really beautiful poetry too. And I just loved the fact that he could do both. And I wanted to be a writer like that could do both. And so I had a friend who read The No-Brainer's Guide to Decomposition, and she said that she never thought a zombie book would make her cry. And so I feel like that's my accomplishment, and that was my ability to do both. And so, yeah. So Samantha, what about you? What's your young writer experience?
I know. My love of like horror and scary stories like started with my like hatred of them. Like I was a very fearful young person, so like afraid of the dark and afraid of um like I was a Girl Scout, you know, and so like people would tell scary stories, ghost stories or whatever around a campfire, and I would just go into my tent. Like I can't handle it, and I can only sort of handle it now. But I started watching paranormal investigative shows, like, you know, like ghost hunting shows, of which there are many. Now they're like all over YouTube, and it's shameful how many of them I subscribe to. But I I just kind of was trying to tackle this fear by writing about it, you know, like I love that was just how it worked. You know, I still can't really like watch horror movies because I can't separate real violence from fake violence in my
That's
brain.
awesome.
But I can write them pretty gory, you know.
Yeah.
But you know, so I'm still like it's like some kind of therapy situation.
And I love that so much because see, for me, I'm a huge horror fan, and I've realized that like I'm completely desensitized to like gore and all of that. So when I was writing this book, my editor was like, hey, you write for young kids, you know, you need to tone it down a little bit. But it always fascinates me when I meet other writers that write these amazing, like scary horror, all of that. And they themselves admit that they're not fans of, you know,
No.
horror. And I'm always so impressed because I just assumed, you know, I think that's so impressive. And I love that, you know, we do have authors that come, you know, that represent a variety of the fandom, I guess, of horror, that we all can still produce these amazing novels. So for all of our writers out there, you don't actually have to be, you know, you can still be a scaredy cat and write an amazing horror novel. So
I
don't
know
let
that
that stop
like
you.
I know like one of my favorite novels is The Terror by Dan Simmons, and I
Yes.
cannot watch that show. I watched like half of the first episode and was like, can't do it. Like I know exactly, unless I mean they change things obviously, but I can like anticipate everything that's gonna happen, still can't do it.
Yep.
Like,
one of my absolute favorite middle grade horror novels is Hide and Seeker by Daka Herman. And then I interviewed her and she admitted she absolutely hates horror. And I was so amazed because it's a brilliant, brilliant horror novel for middle grade readers. So I was very impressed. All right, let's get into it so we can teach and inspire our young writers. So we are going to go through some mentor texts with you all that are from our own books, and we're going to go through and show you how we used, you know, suspense and tension and all of those in our own books, and show you how you can use those in your own writing as well. And so the mentor text that I will be working from today is The No-Brainer's Guide to Decomposition. Now, this is the story of Franny. Franny lives on a forensic anthropology facility with her father, because her father is the university professor that runs it. If you don't know what a forensic anthropology facility is, that is a body farm. That is where scientists take cadavers, they take dead bodies, they lay them out in a field, sometimes they bury them, and they study their decomposition. They study what happens to our bodies after we die. So they can take that data, and sometimes law enforcement uses it, scientists uses it. And so what happens is those dear bodies that are out in the field decide that they don't want to be dead anymore, and they turn into zombies, and Franny has to figure out what's happening before those zombies take over. And so what I'll be showing you today is how I slowly reveal those zombies in the story, and how that kind of slow reveal of the zombies builds the tension in the story.
Okay, and so I am going to be speaking about Clever Creatures of the Night. And this is a story about Case is the main character's name, and she goes to this house. You can kind of see it in the cover. Yeah, she's looking for a friend of hers who is staying there with some roommates. The friend has invited Case to the house to see her. And then when Case gets there, the friend is not there, and the roommates are very cagey about what happened to her. And so I love setting. Okay. And so my editors often have to be like, rein it back. Like they don't need, pages and pages about the trees in the sky. And I'm like, don't they though? So I try to create a lot of tension with setting, with animals. I love to like write about animals and just like a general sense of how the natural world influences the entire vibe of the story. So I'm going to be sort of picking out scenes where like, again, there's something sort of natural in the story, and not pages and pages of trees, but sort of, and then how that influences the characters and the plot. We also want to say that this is interactive. Okay, so this is a workshop style thing. So we are asking people to have like something to write on, write with, iPad, pen, pencil. We do have some activities built in. And so we are going to get to our sort of essential question, which we've sort of previewed, which is how do writers create tension, suspense, and scary moments, and in our planning for this workshop, we do it in different ways, which is great. You can see the different ways that we work to establish that. But first we have some definitions, like what is tension? What is suspense? Like, what do these things mean, right? I can take this first one.
Yeah, go for it.
Dramatic tension, and I pulled these definitions. They're from a website called Drama Queen. So credit to that person. Dramatic tension identifies a state of uncertainty and lack of knowledge, sometimes also referred to as the state of waiting. Tension creates a calculated vagueness over the outcome, an uncertain expectation of an event. So yeah, in my case, the very opening page is Case arriving to this house, thinking that something is going to be just as it should be, like her friend is there, and then her friend is not there. What happened to the friend? That is sort of an establishment of dramatic tension. Adrianna, you can take the next one.
Yeah, sure. So suspense, it's kind of the opposite of surprise. It's based on the audience being set up with crucial information that the character is denied. So suspense often places the audience in a superior position and provides them with an information head start over the protagonist. The state of suspense makes the audience feel caught between the fear of danger, the worry about the protagonist, the anticipation of the resolution, and the hope for a turn for the better. So if you think of a movie where you're sitting in the audience and you're looking at, the main character in the movie, and there's someone standing behind, the main character, there's the masked, killer, and they're slowly approaching, your main character, your final girl, and they don't know that person is behind them. Something they don't. That's the suspense. And so that is something that we as writers can translate on the page too. You can make your reader know something that your main character does not. And so that's a way that you can create suspense on the page.
Okay, surprise. Surprise is the opposite of suspense. The way it works is that the audience has less information than certain characters. This state of not knowing and being in the dark leads to a surprising revelation or final twist for the audience. I think this is really hard. Like everything, dramatic tension and suspense is like my jam. I can do it. Adrianna has more kind of jump scare moments in her book. And she's going to talk about how she does that, right? When I would also like to know, because I think that this is just so hard to, instead of just being like, boo, how to actually.
I think for me, part of that is just due to the age that I write for, because my books, I am trying to keep kids that are in like 4th, 5th, and 6th grade completely engaged in a book. I like to have a lot of surprise moments, and I really like those to happen at the end of a chapter, because my entire goal is to keep you reading. I want you to absolutely turn the page and have to keep going. And I actually had a reader one time get completely mad at me that I always ended my chapters on cliffhangers. And it was kind of a joking mad, because he was like, Miss, I always have to keep reading, and because you always end them on cliffhangers and I have to keep turning the page. And I was like, I know, man, that's the point.
Oh,
but
good.
Yeah, it's that surprise, dropping that on your reader. The whole point is so that you have to keep reading, because you want to know, how did the character know that? You want that resolution. You want to find out what they knew that you didn't, and so that keeps you reading.
So we're going to dive in now to our books and sort of, attempt to explain how we make this happen, right? So this is the very first page of Clever Creatures of the Night. The print is pretty small on the screen. I'm just going to read it from my copy here. All the early mornings look like this. The distant hills are shrouded by a dull gray murk. The trees are frozen in their stark stances. The sky is so thick and ash color that it's impossible to tell what kind of birds soar silently by until they let out their small, distinguishable cries. When the sun finally hauls itself up and over the zigzag horizon, its weak light is tissue paper pink. Is this beautiful or not? Case rolls down the window to get a better view of those shrouded distant hills and is immediately hit with the smell of a trash fire. She jolts back in her seat. The scent of smoldering wood alongside the sharp reek of melting plastic is so fresh and familiar. Someone is always burning something out here, even though the county has banned fires. Case catches the concerned look of the driver in the rearview mirror. It's the air, she says. The man crinkles his nose. I've never been down this road. Okay. And then I think Adrianna is going to ask me questions about them.
All right. So you have to remember that our essential question is, how do writers create tension, suspense, and scary moments as we're reading through, the selection that Samantha just had? So for me, I honestly really like the last thing that the man said. I've never been down this road. Because that right there, I don't know, that kind of gives me goosebumps when I'm reading this. Because to me, that's the punch of that selection. Because Case is having one reaction to what is being seen throughout this, but then the man is having a different reaction. I don't know. But for you, I totally see what you were talking about, where you love setting, because this is a setting selection. So I want you, as a writer, though, walk us through of how, as a writer, you were using setting to build this scene. Because obviously you have all manner of things that you could have picked to build this scene. What made you choose the things that you did to set up so that you were creating, this vibe of what you wanted Case to experience, as she is going through, this area? Why did you pick what you did to create this? Because, you obviously are wanting her to experience a certain mood.
Right. So there is revealed later that something has gone wrong. There's a catastrophe, an environmental catastrophe, which is why the description is like ash colored sky pink, you know, like it looks like the cover, which is helpful. But you know, like this sense of like, why is the sky pink? Why does every morning look like this? You know, and that is revealed later, like something strange has happened. There is also that, is this beautiful or not? There's a lot throughout the book of nature being either lovely or indifferent or outwardly hostile, you know, and that goes back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
The scent of like trash fires, like why are people always burning trash? Well, if you live in the country, people burn
Yeah.
trash or people burn all kinds of things. So this sense of like familiar versus not familiar, this is also very much inspired by the beginning of Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca,
Mm-hmm.
which is just the like, last night I dreamt I went to Manderley again and I was driving up to this place. And again, that book is set up where it's like she thinks that something wonderful is going to happen. She's going to like meet her husband, and then like everyone wants to kill her because he like maybe he killed his former wife, you know.
Right.
So I just like this ominous slash, is this a safe place? Is this a terrible place? Um, Complication that I
Yeah.
am trying to work with.
Yeah. And one thing I would advise our students out there, you really, really, your word choice in this is amazing. And I really want to, in that first paragraph, I want to advise our students to really pay attention to the verbs that you chose, because we have things like the sun finally hauls itself up and that the trees are frozen. You could have just said, you know, the trees are standing in their start, or the sun finally rose itself. Those would have been very common descriptions, but your word choice is so specific, I feel like, in exactly conveying the imagery that you wanted to, and that's really important. When you definitely had a deliberate imagery you wanted to create, and word choice is definitely a part of that. So could you talk a little bit about, you know, how your word choices assisted you in creating the imagery that you wanted?
Sure. One of the things is I love to do that. I love diction. Like I love it. I love to choose the right verb. I love to choose a verb that is possibly a little unexpected. It is like my happy place to write, to like choose the right word. And so I do think about it 8 times. Um uh you know, like I just kind of agonize over like this bird for, do I need to have the word silently? Do I need to have small and distinguishable? Like I kind of agonize over it to death. But like one of the things that, again, I could get carried away, and I have gotten carried away. And I think that maybe writers in any, or early writers, as in like you're new to writing and or you're early drafting, you know, you just trying to get words down, and then you go back to thinking in terms of like, is this a necessary sentence? Is this a necessary, does it actually, you know, at the time you may read this paragraph and you're like, okay, that's like a nice description, but like the description, as I was saying, kind of reveals something that you will learn later in the book about why it looks like that, you know. So I'm trying to, you want to be deliberate in what you're describing, why you're describing it, why you're describing it like that. Like there is some sort of significance that will uh, come later, so that it doesn't seem just like a random description of
Right.
the sky. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I'm going to ask you this because I think our educators out there might appreciate this. How much do you revise then your writing, since you are trying to make deliberate word choices? How much do you revise?
Um, I mean, a lot. Although I will say that I do think that again, this sounds like I do think that this is what I am good at. Like this,
Oh,
I think that
excellent.
I am terrible at like plotting, or like so my revisions mostly involve like reordering the book entirely. You know, I mean, so like that is much harder for me. than doing like an opening like this, which I probably mull over more so than like before I start writing it. Like I kind of want to see it. But that is, I do a lot of revising, but I don't necessarily do a lot of like that's not where I revise is necessarily. In
no, that makes sense. Because I think writers each have their different strengths. So I see what you're saying. Because I think I'm like that too, where I tend, when I get my edit letter, it usually has to do with big things regarding the plot, but like my word choices are not ever it. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so then we have, this is the point where we have our little activity portion. So I have a scene on the following slide from Clever Creatures of the Night. And what elements in this scene create tension? Yeah, so we just talked about this, right? So you can certainly piggyback off of the things that we chose. Okay, this is from page 91. So I'm only telling you that, not because I think that you have this book, but it's like mid-ish, you know, towards the middle of the book. And it says, I can just read it for you here. In the den over the fireplace, there's a bust of a stag, what's known as a 12-point. The same way a tree has limbs, an antler has points. If each antler has 6 points, then the animal in total has 12. Each point is an indicator of maturity. The more points, the older the animal. The more points, the prouder a hunter is of his kill. This kill would have made someone very proud. Below the bust of the stag and a little off to the side is Troy. He's standing on a chair with his back facing the room, scanning bookshelves, looking for something specific. He doesn't know Case is behind him, which gives her time to study the stag's head. She focuses on its nose, wondering how it somehow still appears moist. Then she shifts her eyes to meet its indifferent glass stare. Do you hunt? Case finally asks. So again, you've already heard me talk about like wording, and then you're like, what the heck is this with this freaking stag? You know, but again, like I think that it like does something, you know, for the vibe, for the story, even if you haven't read it. So I'm going to be picking out things that you think add to this vibe setting thing that I'm trying to establish here. So we're pausing. Yeah, it says pause for 3 to 5 minutes. I'm to remind the teachers that you can hit pause to give students more time to work, and that you can set a timer. We are both doing this activity as well, and so we will share our results too.
So I guess you and I will discuss it as...
We can wait. I guess we can wait. You can see our timer. We can wait till like 30. Do you think that's good?
I suppose.
Okay.
I do like that description. That's really cool. Which makes me beg the question, and I guess this is a good question since you and I are both in Texas, and there are lots of people around here who do hunt things like that. How many of those massive deer mounts you have been around?
You get like, I don't know, like I still feel like unsettled if you go into a house where there's like lots of them. People around here also just kind of like hipstery decorate with like taxidermied ocelots or something. You know, it's like, I don't know if that's regional.
But it's true though. Like I can see the point of this passage, because if I walked into a room and that was hanging on the wall, there is an instant mood that I would get. Yeah.
Like it just says that, like, I mean, like, should I tell you what it says? I mean, like, what I was trying to go for here is, you know, you have this extraordinarily large distinguished animal. So it is old by the time that it is shot.
Yeah.
And someone is proud of it. Like, it just has, there's a whole sense of like ownership and who owns this land and who owns this house. And it's just a power move, right? It's a power move of like, this is my house, this is my stuff, I'm in charge here. But Case, like, somehow she has the upper hand just because she's not noticed in the scene. Like, where you were talking about, like,
right, she's behind him. Yeah,
right.
he doesn't know she's in the room yet.
Yeah. And so she's able to, if she's caught off guard at first, then she's able to tone that down a little, because she is able to kind of take it in, right? And that's like indifferent glass stare, which in a way matches previous descriptions of this character Troy, who has like a real kind of like aloof quality to him.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then the like a question that I don't Texans don't necessarily get, but if you had something like that in a house, I feel like, do you hunt is almost, it's a different question than like, did you kill that animal or something, you know?
Right, yeah.
But it's a very similar question. And then she's like gauging the threat level that this person may have, although she sort of feels like she has, there's a lot of like who has the upper hand in this, in this entire situation.
Do you hunt is a vague question. There's no direct object after it. She's not asking him what he hunts. It's just, do you hunt in general? And I find that it's a good question, because if she feels threatened by him, I don't know. I think asking a general question, do you hunt? She didn't ask, do you hunt deer? Do you hunt? Yeah. She just asked, do you hunt? And I think that to me is more her asking, like, should I be threatened by you? Like, yeah. I don't know. That's how I am gauging that question. I like that it's a general question. And it's like you said, she wasn't asking, did you hunt that? Did you? Yeah. I like that it's a general question.
She's also, this takes place in a rural county, like a few counties over from Dallas County. And she's from this county. And I feel like that's a question that rural people ask each other.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
You know, like, also just like, what kind of person are you?
Right. Exactly.
To that. Okay. Well, we hope that you all also came up with some cool stuff there. So we are going to now shift to Adrianna's example.
All right. So mine are a little less literary than Samantha's. We're going to get into some zombies here. So, so this selection from the No Brainer's Guide to Decomposition is Franny's first encounter with one of the zombies. And this passage, it straddles chapter 3 and chapter 4, which is why there's a little chapter break in there. So you can kind of see, like I was talking about, how I like to end chapters, which is why I included it. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to scroll down, because like we've said, this kind of cuts off and is a little bit hard to read with that logo. So here we go. This is from a little bit of chapter 3 and chapter 4 from No Brainer's Guide to Decomposition. I stare through the wire fence at a large Angus black cow from the university's agriculture center chewing on grass, its jaw rolling around as its tail flies away. She seems happy, only worrying about how to fill up all 4 of her stomachs. Something brushes against my leg, probably a winding branch of the mesquite bush I'm standing next to, and I slap it away absent-mindedly with my fingers. It scratches me again, and I shake my leg, but something holds on to the fabric of my pants. I look down. That's when I see it. A hand shoots up out of the dirt and wraps around my ankle. Fingers grip my ankle tightly as jagged nails press into my skin. I scream and shake my leg as the hand writhes in the dirt, revealing an arm emerging from the ground. Kicking hard enough to free myself, I run from the fence and the hand clawing the air at the loss of its victim. I turn back just in time to see another arm spring from the dirt and grip the wires of the fence for leverage. The muscles in my legs burn as I scramble up the rocks and across the patches of grass. I'm completely out of breath as I run up the hill toward my house, wanting to put as much distance between me and whatever just popped out of the ground. The hot sun beats down on my back as I race past Mr. Gearhart and the buzzards buzzing, circling the metal cage we put over him. When I finally reach the long porch that borders the back of our house, I collapse on the steps. Wiping away the hair that stuck on my cheeks with sweat, I squeeze my eyes closed, trying to erase the image of the bony fingers wrapped around my ankle. There's no way that actually happened. It's impossible that it was real. So that is, Franny's poor first encounter with a zombie. And she's a little bit shocked.
Yeah. So again, the question is, how do writers create tension, suspense, and scary moments? There's a little bit of buildup, like you gave us the cow, and then most of it is the create and keep up the scary moment, right? Tell us about how you sort of again, the hard thing for me is it would have stopped for me at my ankle. Right, that's scary, right? And then it sort of continues. So the continuation of it. Tell us how you kept it up.
Well, so you build it. So, and the building for me was her not realizing what's brushing her pant leg.
Right.
So I didn't want to start. You're not going to want to start it with her standing there and something suddenly grabs her leg. There's no building up in that. That's too sudden. So that's why when you look at this passage, she first, feels something brush her leg and she just brushes it off. And then something brushes her leg again and then she finally feels something grab her leg. She looks down and oh my gosh, there's a hand around her ankle. And then you cut the scene. Like in the book, you actually have to turn the page to find out what's happening next. That's how I like to end my chapters, because if you end a chapter where your character has just been grabbed around the ankle by something unknown that shot up out of the dirt, you kind of have to turn the page and start the next chapter. And that's what I like to do, with my chapters to ensure that my reader's going to keep going. And so that's, the buildup is her not knowing what grabbed her ankle. But then it's almost kind of like a starting pistol at a race, that hand wrapping around her ankle is the starting pistol of the action. And now it's going to go. And so you can kind of notice the sentences are a little short. It reads really quick. And so that's how the action is going to go. And I always try to, but then you have to give your reader a break. Those kind of scenes can't last too long. You're only going to have your reader's attention for scenes like that for only so long. And so you notice it then ends. There's no way that actually happened. It's impossible. It was real. And then she gets a breath. It stops. The scene actually completely changes. It goes to the next morning where she's tried to process that the whole night. She's thought about it because that couldn't keep going and keep going. Your reader's not going to have enough stamina for all that action. So you have to think about when you're building tension and you have really, really high tension scenes, think about it like a sprint. How long could you run just at a full out sprint? It's not going to be for very, very long if you're like me. So think about that with your reader. You can't have a super high tension scene for very long. And so that's kind of what I'm showing here. This really is just when you look at it, 3 paragraphs of something that's super high tension.
So let's talk about one thing that's very clearly different between our 2 books, which is, well, there's love, but point of view. This is in first person present, Yeah.
Yeah.
And so a lot of like this is a choice, like again to the students who are watching, this is a choice that we make. And sometimes we make the wrong choice and we have to change everything. You know, it was like she does this, and then we're like, oh, maybe it'd be better in first person present or first person past, you know. So okay, and I've written books in various tenses, you know. So what is the choice of first person present tense?
So all of my books are actually in first person
Mm.
present, and that's honestly because I like to write books that have a really strong voice, and that's easiest for me to do that in first person. And then I also like to write books that have a really strong sense of like immediacy to them, and to me present tense carries that really well. And so yeah, I'll actually every single book that I've ever written has been in first person present. I tried to write one time in third person past, and I sent it to my editor, and the very first note she gave me was to change the whole thing back to first person present. And so I've never done it again. But yeah, it's because to me, for writing for a younger audience, when you kind of see the style of my writing, it it sounds better. I'll be honest, it sounds better for my style of writing to be written in first person present.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, let's go into the activity then.
All right, so for our activity, it says read the scene on the following slide from the No Brainers Guide to Decomposition. So this scene, it ends in a surprise because it's a scene written by me. But analyzing Franny's narrative leading up to this reveal that you'll notice will show that it's not surprising after all. And this will make sense once we read the passage. What clues does Franny give to show the figure in the field is dead? What storytelling benefit is there to showing the clues first and then the reveal instead of the other way around? So let's read the passage so that will all make sense. And then I may go back to that slide and read the question again so that it will all make sense. So what is happening here is that Franny is with her friend Benji, and the figure that we got to be introduced to in that previous passage that grabs Franny's ankle is now approaching Benji and Franny, and Franny has some bad news for this character. That's when I hear the growl. Benji and I spin around and spot a person standing under the tall live oak tree next to cadaver 102108, shoulders heaving. The person growls again. Benji and I jump back and I grab his hand. You're not supposed to be here, I say, my breath catching in my throat. The person is wearing a dirty red hoodie over their head. Their hands shake at their side as they take a shuffling step forward, dust swirling around their feet. They open their mouth to speak, but a wheezing sound comes out instead. I narrow my eyes and examine the person. It's the only thing I can think of to distract myself from the fact that I can feel my heartbeat in my toes, making Arenita swing furiously from thread to thread. Underneath their hoodie, the person has reddish skin around their mouth, nose, and eyes. They hold out their hand, and a clump of maggots falls to the ground from the sleeve of their hoodie. Franny, who is that? Benji asks by my side, squeezing my hand and pulling me from my thoughts. The person takes another step toward us, kicking up dirt as their foot drags. Their mouth opens again, their lips cracked and their tongues swollen. Help me. I swallow hard and push Benji behind me. I recognize that sound, that voice. That's what I heard last night as I was trying to go to sleep. I squeeze my eyes shut, trying to make Arenita calm down long enough so I can put together all the information she's bouncing between. The loose dirt with maggots, the blowflies in the air, the reddish skin on the person's face, their swollen tongue and filthy clothes. Help me, they say again, their body shuddering as their chest heaves. I shake my head and clear my throat, trying to get my words in the right order. I've got bad news for you, I finally blurt out. You're dead. So let's go back to the prompt slide really quick. So now that we've had the selection, what clues does Franny give to show that figure out in the field that they're dead? But what storytelling benefit was there to showing all those clues first and then Franny revealing to them that they're dead, instead of the other way around, instead of her saying first, hey, you're dead, and here's how I know. So that's your practice prompt. And remember our essential question of how we're building tension, surprise in this one. And I do want to let you know that Franny telling the figure that they're dead ends the chapter, because of course it does.
So we can start our conversation here. Because like when you talked about like immediacy of the characters, can you guys still hear me?
It's a little bit more difficult.
Yes, it's because my iPods just went out as we thought that they totally would. I thought they would.
No, I think you'll be okay. Don't worry about it.
Okay. About like the immediacy of the character, and like there's a difference, and we don't have to go back to the first slide, but the difference between like the end, which is like, what is happening? Like that was impossible, versus her gaining a little bit more knowledge as she sort of sees the foot dragging and the dust kicking and the maggots and the whatever. But there's still that sense of like in the again, like I can put together the information, you know, like that I'm not quite totally there yet, but I more so than I was before.
Yeah, and like I said, I think for me, what I liked was I always am wanting to challenge my readers to see if they can put the puzzle pieces together along with my characters. And can they come to the conclusion not only with them, but sometimes even before them? Like I wrote a book, The Ghost of Rancho Espanto, and I always challenge my readers to see if they can figure out, there's a huge twist in that book. And I always try to challenge my readers to see if they can figure out the twist before the main character does. And I like to do that with my readers. And it's kind of here, you know, it's, can you kind of connect the dots that Franny's connecting before she says it, you know? And so that's why I like to have her present the information first. Had she just said, you know, when he says, help me, and, you know, she goes, oh, well, okay, because you're dead, that might have been confusing to the reader and think, well, why does she think that, you know? And then it would have been a little bit, it's not as punchy to end the chapter with her just giving the reasons she thinks that. It's a lot punchier for her to be processing it and then give her reason. Because then the next chapter starts with him kind of the zombie having to process that and going on from there. And also you'll notice there's references to Arañita in this passage. My main character Franny has ADHD, and that's how she refers to her ADHD. So this actually thought process for her is more representative of her ADHD. The fact that she's going to be processing something and then blurt something out is kind of showing that thought process better as well. But for me, in terms of, this is kind of how we build tension too. It's can you put these clues together, put, you know, these pieces together and come to the same conclusion that our characters did as well.
Yeah. So I can move to our recap of terms. I don't know if we need to go back or if the slide recap, the next slide recaps it. Okay, no, I can just do it real quick. So again, we're talking about dramatic tension, that general state of uncertainty, suspense, the audience being set up with information that the character is denied. Oh, there it is. And then surprise, when the audience has less information than the certain characters. Okay. And then what we have. I think that, I mean, we're trying to, at this point, like, how do you do this? And again, it's work, right? Like, if we're like, I'm gonna write a scary story, it's gonna be scary because it's at night and they're going camping and there's a monster, you know, and you're like, that is a great start. However, like, again, like that we like Adrianna was sort of like the order in which information is revealed to the character. You know, like how you got to think deliberately about how you want that to happen. The way that you choose to describe things, why are you doing that? Because it will be significant later. I mean, like a lot of horror movies are set up like some image that you think is like, or you don't even think about it. If you write stories a lot, then you think about it. Then you think like maybe that picture or whatever that they panned across during the credits, opening credits, you're like, that has something to do with it. But like typically, you know, a casual viewer won't necessarily, and then they'll have to be like, oh, that makes sense. Like all the pieces are connected. So there is a lot of not just assuming because you have a scene where like someone gets their arm whacked off that's scary. You know, it takes a lot of deliberation to like get to that point and have it actually be scary, right?
Not that arms being whacked off isn't good. There's a lot of body parts that fall off and no.
Sure.
But honestly, I love that they paired our two books together for this because it's showing young writers that there are multiple ways that this, you know, building tension and suspense can be accomplished, because you and I both did it in very different ways. I feel like your book did an amazing job with atmosphere and setting, and mine did it with different ways of doing the action and ending chapters. And so I think it's going to show, you know, our young writers here that there isn't just one way to accomplish this, and you have to play around with different ways, because we all have different styles of writing and we all have, you know, different storytelling methods that fit how we like to write best. And so, you know, you have to find what works for you. And there isn't just one way to, you know, kind of answer our essential question. And so that's what I like about how, you know, Samantha and I's books kind of work together to answer this question.
And we did leave you with prompts. You know, like I came up with some. Is this mine? This is mine, I think. And then Adrianna came up with another prompt. Mm-hmm. I did like a blackout poetry kind of situation where if you have one of our novels, you can use it, or you can use any novel that you think has like a vibe, right? Read through the page and come up with one word that could describe the vibe of that page. Like in literary studies, this is considered the mood, which is the emotion or feeling that the story evokes in the reader. Creepy, you know, suspenseful or serene. You know, it doesn't have to be a scary story, sure, whatever. Pick out the words or phrases, or 2 or 3 words together, that the author uses that specifically contribute to the mood. Write a couple paragraphs about what makes these particular words or phrases emotionally resonant, like how they kind of hit you on a gut level and how they contribute to the overall mood. That was one of the prompts. We had other prompts though.
This was you did the artistic prompt as well.
The version, yes. This was like everything was the same except for you would make a photocopy of that page if you have a hard copy, and then like draw boxes around the words that kind of like contribute to the mood, and then you black out the rest of the page and create kind of a blackout poem that would be like super emo, I think.
I remember those days. And then this one was really simple. But we talked about this a lot today, about how word choice, you know, really can contribute to that mood, just like what Samantha was talking about. But I really like doing this sometimes. But just take your paper, decide what kind of mood, you know, you want. for your story. Is it, you want spooky, dark, dramatic? What is it? Write that word in the middle of your paper, draw a circle around it. But remember that you're always wanting to engage all of the five senses when you're creating a scene. And so write all the five senses around your paper and then brainstorm kind of descriptive words that you can use. What kind of verbs would you use? Anything around that, and use those words when you're writing your scene. Because look at we talked about the amazing word choices that Samantha had used in that opening scene of her book. I bet she made a word map. So there you go. So just kind of, that would be my prompt as well. We had one quick question that someone had asked. So let's address that really quick since we have about 5 minutes left. We had someone asked, what's a revision tip that works best for both of us? So Samantha, what's a revision tip that you would like to tell our young readers, young writers about?
Okay. Okay, so
I put you on the spot. I'm sorry.
I know. So the thing that we talked about this a little bit, but the thing that like I'm not as good at, I think, is just like plot. Okay, like adding words to the story. Okay, like that move the plot forward. And so sometimes I will get caught up on like, I don't know what to write today because I don't know what this character is gonna do. So adding words is hard. And so if that is the case, I don't want to say that day is a wash. Okay. What I want to do is go back. And as I mentioned, I love sentences. So I will just work on those sentences and just like polish what I have until they really shine, and like delete things, or is the verb the right verb, like real fiddly kind of things. And that to me is, probably to lots of people is just as important work as like adding more words onto the word count.
Yeah. I think for me, my first book, The Total Eclipse of Nestor Lopez, is the book that taught me how to revise, because I wrote that book, revised it like a few times. I sent it to my agent. She read it. She gave me one tip for what she thought I should do to make it better. I started to revise it, putting her one tip into my revision, and realized that her one suggestion completely destroyed the plot of the whole book. And I had to rewrite that entire book, starting from chapter 3 on. So basically I had to write a whole new book and throw the whole old book away. So my revision tip is that nothing is sacred. Sometimes you have to throw entire chapters, multiple chapters out. Be willing to get rid of a whole bunch of writing that you spent a lot of time on. But be willing to get rid of a lot of stuff and be willing to rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. I've worked with a lot of students who will write and rewrite one time and think that, hey, I did it, I revised, I'm done. Authors will go over and over and over their writing. I think for my last book, when I finally sent the final version in, it said like Rancho Espanto 0.25, because I had read and revised that book 25 times, but I don't think that's the right number because I gave up counting. But yeah, nothing's sacred and you have to go over it tons and tons of times.
Yeah. So. And I think that like also, if your readers, be they your friends or your editors or your agents, are telling you that something, and for this panel, is like not scary. This is not as scary as you think it is. Like, this is not as suspenseful as you think it is. This is not doing the thing that you want it to do.
Yeah.
Believe them. Like, if enough of them are saying that, and don't be like, no, yes, it is. Yeah. Like, I promise you, it takes if you want other people to read your book and be engaged with it, then you have to be able to, this has happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to Adrianna, right? With like, I see that you really like this, what you've done here, but it doesn't do anything for the book that you're writing. And you want to fight back. And sometimes you can, and sometimes you can fix it, or sometimes you just have to delete it because they're right.
Yeah. I got told I was doing too much. I had to pull back with my zombies. All right, so I think we've had a good session. I hope you guys have gotten a lot out of our essential question and our session today. If you want more craft resources, you can check out the rest of the craft panels at this year's festival, as well as our mini craft lessons on the educator page of the festival website. So Samantha and I want to thank you all for watching, and we really appreciate your time today, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the Latinx Kidlit Book Festival this year.
Thank you.